Good morning. Here is an intriguing supernatural story set in 1924 Cornwall. And here is my short introduction. This novel follows Bethany Brown, an orphaned teenager from London, who moves to the grand Farthing Green house to live with her wealthy relatives, the Trengrouses. The story introduces a sharp contrast between Bethany's impoverished urban background and the mysterious ancient traditions of the coastal estate, which is managed by a butler named Mr. Luscombe. Tensions arise as Bethany navigates the strict social hierarchy of the household. These include a controversial encounter with a young, handsome gardener, and a forbidden visit to a reputed witch named Morwenna. The family's history is steeped in local folklore, specifically involving something called the Death Pond. You wouldn't want to go swimming in there. And a centuries-old curse that haunts the grounds. Meanwhile, the family patriarch struggles with post-war trauma, often finding solace only through the use of firearms. Ultimately, the story highlights Bethany's volatile emotional state and her struggle to adapt to a world defined by secrets, class distinctions, and the lingering shadows of the Great War. As usual, I hope you enjoy the AI voices. It's done a great job as usual. And if you'd like to subscribe and ring that bell, that would be fantastic. And if you comment, as usual, I will reply to everybody. Everybody. Here we go.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking you on a journey. And I want you to really picture this.
Set the scene.
Yeah, so it is the early summer of 1924. You are standing on the rugged, windswept coast of Cornwall.
Beautiful.
Right. The air is thick with the smell of sea salt, damp earth, wild thyme. And right before you sits this sprawling, magnificent estate.
A prodigy house.
Exactly. A 1604 Elizabethan prodigy house. It's got manicured lawns. And there's this ancient sprawling oak tree that casts this long, dark shadow over a perfectly still pond.
It sounds totally idyllic.
It does. It sounds like the absolute perfect setting for, a classic British manor house mystery. And on the surface, that is exactly what our source material today presents itself as.
Right.
We are diving into excerpts from a really fascinating narrative titled The Children of Farthing Green.
Which is such a great title.
It is. And it has all the hallmarks of a traditional Gothic tale. You've got the imposing estate, the rebellious orphan arriving from the big city, local whispers of an ancient curse.
And a hidden treasure.
Yes, the hidden treasure. But okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today is to peel back that really picturesque Edwardian wallpaper.
And see what's rotting underneath.
Precisely. What we're really going to reveal is how this 1924 setting acts as an absolute pressure cooker. It is a masterclass in masking profound darkness. It's bubbling over with post-World War I trauma, brutal class warfare, and supernatural folklore that might actually have a terrifyingly logical explanation.
The contrast between that beautiful Cornish setting you just described and the actual psychological reality of these characters is really what makes these sources so compelling, because it's very easy to get swept up in the romanticism of a summer by the sea. You go in expecting a standard Gothic haunting.
Clanking chains, spectral figures in the hallways.
Exactly. But while you might be looking for literal ghosts, the real haunting in this text is far more insidious.
How so?
Well, the true specter is the psychological wreckage of the Great War. And that is violently clashing with an unyielding, archaic class system.
Right.
This is a society that is desperately trying to pretend the world hasn't fundamentally changed since 1914.
Which we know it absolutely had.
Completely. The horrors here are human, they are deeply psychological, and they're tragically grounded in the reality of the 1920s.
And that human element is really thrust into the spotlight the very moment our protagonist arrives on the scene. Bethany Brown.
Yes, Bethany.
The text actually spends a lot of time establishing where she comes from before she even sets foot in Cornwall.
Which is vital context.
It is. She's 16 years old, and she's arriving from Hoxton. Now, I know Hoxton today has a very different reputation. It's quite trendy. But looking at the historical context of 1924, this was the gritty, working-class East End of London, right?
Very much so. Hoxton in the 1920s was characterized by dense smog, unrelenting noise, overcrowded tenements. It was a constant daily struggle for survival.
Just a really hard life.
Absolutely. It was a world of brown brick and gray skies. And the author emphasizes this to highlight the unimaginable weight Bethany is carrying when she steps off the Paddington Express into this lush, overwhelmingly green world of Cornwall.
Right, because she's an orphan.
She is. But the text makes it clear that the loss of her parents wasn't due to, say, a lingering illness. It was a brutally sudden, violent event.
The description of the accident in the sources is actually quite shocking, like in its suddenness.
It comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, she was just out window shopping with her parents on a totally normal day, and a drunk driver loses control of a horse-drawn carriage.
A horrific scene.
It mounts the pavement, crashes right into them. Both of her parents are killed instantly, and Bethany is violently thrown.
And she doesn't just walk away from that.
No. The text notes she sustained a massive, life-threatening head injury.
The physical trauma she endures is just staggering. Following the accident, she actually spends days hovering between life and death in an infirmary.
Which back then, medical care was...
Oh, completely basic compared to today. She eventually has her head shaped for surgery and is left bearing this long, painful scar. But the tragedy really doesn't end with her physical injuries.
No, it gets worse socially.
Because the social and economic safety nets that we take for granted today simply did not exist for the working class in 1920s London.
If you couldn't pay, you were out.
Exactly. The sources detail how, in the immediate aftermath, while she is literally still in the hospital bed, her family's rented home is repossessed by the landlord.
Unbelievable.
All of their worldly belongings are dumped onto the pavement in the rain.
And then they are just picked clean by local thieves.
Yep.
The image of her arriving there with a small handcart, trying to salvage her life, only to find absolutely nothing left. It's devastating.
It's a total erasure of her former existence.
Completely. But what really struck me in the notes is the grandmother's reaction to all this.
Oh, this is a fascinating part of the text.
Right. Bethany's grandmother takes her in initially, but she completely fails to cope with Bethany. She eventually becomes bedridden just from the stress of it.
Because Bethany has changed.
Exactly. The grandmother claims Bethany has completely changed. Before the accident, she was described as meek and obedient.
A proper young lady of the era.
Right, but afterward, she becomes defiant, angry, and prone to what her grandmother calls wickedness and foul language.
I'm looking at a note here regarding that specific personality shift, and it completely changes the framing of the story.
It really does.
Because in the 1920s, the adults around her framed this radical change as a moral failing.
They just think she's acting out.
Right. They call her insolent, troubled, a bad seed. But if we actually evaluate the incredibly specific details the author provides about Bethany's internal experience, they align perfectly with the severe traumatic brain injury.
TBI.
Specifically one affecting the frontal lobe.
Let's pause on that because I think it's crucial for the listener to understand. What exactly does a frontal lobe injury do to a person's behavior?
Well, the frontal lobe governs personality, impulse control, emotional regulation, and your social filter.
The things that make you act appropriately in public.
Exactly. When it sustains massive trauma, a person can literally lose the neurological ability to suppress anger or filter their thoughts.
Which explains the foul language and defiance.
Yes. And Bethany describes these episodes where anger simply takes over her body. She vividly articulates the sensation of watching herself speak.
That sounds terrifying.
She says she hears the words come out of her mouth, but feels as though she isn't the one saying them. She actually tells her aunt at one point, I feel and hear the words I am saying, but somehow I don't seem to be saying them.
That is such a heavy experience for a 16-year-old girl to go through completely alone.
It is. In 1924, society diagnoses this as bad behavior or a lack of respect or a moral rot that requires strict discipline.
When really she needs medical help.
Today, a neurologist would immediately recognize this as a textbook consequence of significant cerebral trauma. She is a medical victim being punished socially for her neurological symptoms.
And because her grandmother just can't handle her, she is shipped off to her distant aunt and uncle.
Tegan and Kenver Trengrass.
Right, at Farthing Green house in Cornwall. Which brings us to this massive culture clash.
Oh, it's night and day.
You take this deeply traumatized, neurologically altered teenage girl from the slums of East London and drop her into this sprawling estate. And the text uses the term Elizabethan prodigy house to describe Farthing Green.
It does.
For those who might not be familiar with architectural history, what exactly does that mean? Because Bethany isn't just arriving at a nice, large countryside house, is she?
Not at all. A prodigy house wasn't just a wealthy family's home.
Okay.
These were massive, incredibly showy palaces. They were built by ambitious courtiers in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, specifically to house Queen Elizabeth I and her massive retinue as she traveled the country.
So they were built to show off.
Exactly. They were designed to be intimidating monuments to immense wealth and power. They featured huge expanses of glass, towering chimneys, and sprawling symmetrical gardens.
So Bethany is stepping into a physical manifestation of centuries-old, unyielding, aristocratic dominance.
Yes, and it's surrounded by 300 acres of private land.
The sensory whiplash she experiences there must be incredibly disorienting. She actually tells her cousins, Lamorna and Simon, that she had literally never seen the sea before the train pulled into Penzance.
Which is hard for us to imagine.
Think about that for a second. You live on an island, but you've never seen the ocean.
And the sensory details of Cornwall really overwhelm her.
The deep, unending greens, the massive ocean.
And the suffocating silence at night. The text says she can actually hear her own heartbeat, and it completely unmoors her.
The isolation she feels is palpable. The silence of the countryside actually presses against her like a physical weight because she is just so used to the constant chaotic hum of London.
And that alienation is immediately compounded by the staggering wealth and eccentricity of the Trengrouse family.
Especially her aunt.
Yes, Tegan. Tegan is a strict vegetarian.
Which was quite rare back then.
Very rare. The sources note this was a lifestyle choice she made at age 10 after growing up on a pig farm and being traumatized by the sound of slaughter.
So Tegan runs an animal sanctuary.
A zoo, as the family calls it, right there on the grounds, rehabilitating injured wildlife.
And this leads to a moment that perfectly illustrates the huge divide between them. Bethany asks her cousins about the horses in the stable.
She assumes they're for work.
Right. She assumes they are for pulling carts or plows because that is what animals are for in Hoxton. They are for labor.
That's her only context.
So when Lamorna tells her the 8 horses are kept just for fun, Bethany is utterly bewildered. The idea of keeping massive, expensive animals purely for leisure is a level of opulence she literally cannot fathom.
It highlights a complete disconnect in their fundamental understanding of the world. And it extends to the dining room as well.
Oh, the sandwich scene.
Yes. Lamorna and Simon have never eaten meat in their entire lives. When they serve Bethany crab sandwiches and lemonade, she remarks that the crab tastes very fishy.
I loved that detail in the source material. It is like taking someone who has only ever eaten heavily processed fast food chicken nuggets and handing them a fresh oyster.
Exactly.
Her brain literally doesn't know how to process the flavor because her only context for fish is heavily battered and deep fried from a London chip shop.
It is a tiny detail, but it perfectly illustrates how alien this world is to her.
It does. But as much as Bethany feels alienated by this pristine upper-class world, the narrative quickly reveals that Farthing Green is not the sanctuary it pretends to be.
Not at all.
Bethany isn't the only one carrying unseen, untreated damage. And that brings us to the patriarch of the family, Kenver Trengrouse, who is arguably carrying the heaviest invisible burden on the entire estate.
The sources spend a significant amount of time on Kenver, and his backstory is harrowing.
It really is.
Before the Great War, Kenver was a fairly typical minor aristocrat. He managed his shares in gold, silver, and tin mining, enjoyed his estate, and was generally considered a jovial, handsome man.
But then 1914 happens.
Right. When war broke out, he enlisted immediately. The text suggests he assumed, like so many young men of his class, that it would be a brief, glorious adventure.
Over by Christmas.
Exactly. And because of his excellent eyesight and social standing, he joined the newly formed Royal Flying Corps.
The inclusion of the Royal Flying Corps is a very deliberate choice by the author, isn't it?
Absolutely. To understand Kenver's trauma, you have to understand the mechanics of early flight in World War I.
These weren't modern fighter jets.
They were fragile, open-cockpit biplanes made of wood and canvas. The pilots were exposed to freezing temperatures, deafening engine noise, and the constant threat of the aircraft simply falling apart midair.
Let alone being shot down.
Right. The text points out a grim reality. The life expectancy of a pilot in the RFC was incredibly short, sometimes measured in mere weeks.
Yet Kenver survived the entire war.
Against all odds.
And he didn't just fly safe routes. He flew increasingly dangerous missions, transitioning from simple reconnaissance to actively engaging enemy pilots.
The notes mention pilots literally dropping hand grenades out of the cockpit and shooting at each other with pistols in the air.
It's insane to think about.
And Kenver watched every single one of his original friends and comrades die.
Every single one.
He returned to Penzance in 1919 with a Distinguished Flying Cross.
For our listeners, a DFC is a high-level military decoration awarded for heroism or extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. So he comes home a decorated hero.
And the town gives him the nickname Lucky Kenver.
The tragic irony of Lucky Kenver is central to his character.
Yeah.
Because he physically survived, he only has a slight limp from a stray bullet in 1917, but psychologically he was obliterated.
He returns home to the fanfare and the parades, but the text makes it agonizingly clear that the jovial man Tegan married died in the skies over Europe.
He's a completely different person.
Kenver is suffering from severe, completely undiagnosed, and untreated PTSD.
Which they called shell shock at the time. The manifestation of his trauma is terrifying to read about. He suffers from violent, screaming night terrors. It gets so bad that he physically thrashes and punches in his sleep.
To the point where, on the advice of their doctor, he and Tegan no longer share a bed.
Or even a bedroom.
The isolation of that must be profound for both of them. And then we see his primary coping mechanism, which is deeply unsettling.
Especially on an estate where his wife runs an animal sanctuary.
Yes. Kenver obsessively roams the estate with his purdy shotgun.
Which, by the way, is an incredibly expensive, bespoke British firearm. It's a status symbol in itself.
He shoots birds, rabbits, whatever crosses his path.
But it's not for sport, really.
No. The text explicitly states why he does this. Kenver's right hand shakes uncontrollably.
A physical tremor born entirely of his psychological trauma.
Exactly. The only time that tremor stops, the only time his hand is perfectly steady, is when he is aiming his rifle and pulling the trigger.
That is such a chilling, heartbreaking detail. He has to recreate the environment of the war.
The mechanics of aiming.
The gunfire, the bringing of death, just to find a momentary physical peace for his own body.
And Tegan just has to endure the constant crack of gunfire echoing across her animal sanctuary. She knows why he's doing it, but she is entirely powerless to stop it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Kenver isn't an anomaly in this community.
Not at all.
The text uses the supporting cast to show just how pervasive this damage is. It's an entire generation of broken men trying to resume normal life.
Take Dr. Casworn Cornish, the family physician.
Yes, the doctor. He served in the Royal Army Medical Corps. A shell explosion near his trench ruined his inner ear balance.
So his physical equilibrium is gone.
As a result, this distinguished, highly educated doctor cannot ride a two-wheeled bicycle or drive a motor car properly. He is forced to ride around the county on an adult tricycle.
The tricycle is such a striking visual. It completely infantilizes a man of science and status.
It serves as this constant, highly visible, slightly humiliating reminder of the war's physical toll every time he makes a house call.
But it's the psychological toll that the author really zeroes in on, particularly during a dinner party scene in Kenver's study.
That scene is brilliant.
After the women leave the room, Kenver, Dr. Cornish, and the Reverend David Ferris retreat to smoke cigars and drink port. And inevitably, the conversation turns to the war. It's like a black hole that none of them can escape.
That scene is a perfect distillation of how society was trying to process the trauma. We see three distinct reactions from these three men.
Let's break those down.
Dr. Cornish, the man of science, advocates for the emerging field of psychology. He is trying to understand shell shock as a legitimate medical condition.
An injury of the mind.
Rather than a lack of moral fiber or cowardice, which was the prevailing military view at the time.
Right, and then you have Reverend Ferris.
The man of faith. He desperately tries to frame the horrors they witnessed as a spiritual test from the Almighty.
He is clinging to religion to make sense of an industrial slaughter that just defies human comprehension.
And Kenver absolutely rejects both of them. He has no time for the clinical distance of medicine or the comforting platitudes of religion.
He tells the Reverend, God wasn't present at the Second Battle of Ypres. The devil owned that month.
He is just raw, unmitigated rage and grief.
During the same dinner, they share a harrowing anecdote about Mr. Bloomer, the local undertaker, that really stuck with me.
The Mr. Bloomer anecdote is vital because it underscores that the trauma wasn't limited to the men in the front-line trenches or the pilots in the air.
It touched everyone involved in the logistics of it.
Exactly. Mr. Bloomer wasn't a combat soldier. He was a cook. But he was recently found hiding under a table in his shop, completely dissociated and babbling incoherently.
And why was that?
Because a delivery of 12 empty coffins arrived at his shop, and the sheer volume of those wooden boxes triggered a massive flashback to the bodies he had to process and cook for during the war.
It shows how mundane objects can become landmines for the traumatized mind.
Yeah.
And the trauma isn't just self-destructive, it actively harms the next generation. We see this with Tom Polly, the head gardener.
Polly is a dark character.
He lost a leg in the war and navigates the sprawling estate on a wooden peg leg. He is described as a deeply bitter, cruel man.
He displaces his internal agony and his frustration with his physical limitation into physical abuse.
He regularly and brutally beats his twin teenage sons, Menhannick and Hammett, with a stick.
I look at Polly, and I look at Bethany's father, and a clear pattern emerges.
Bethany's father was also in the war.
Yes, and he returned a broken man, completely changing from a cheery, singing father into a dark, brooding figure who gambled away their money and became physically abusive.
So there's a real systemic issue being highlighted here.
The text is illustrating that the rigid Edwardian expectations of masculinity, the stiff upper lip, the demand that men suffer in silence and simply get on with it, are deeply toxic.
These men have no outlet for their pain.
None. The system actively punished them if they tried to find one. If Kenver cried or admitted he was terrified, he'd be stripped of his social standing.
So the violence isn't just displaced aggression.
In many ways, it's the only socially acceptable emotion left to them. Kenver shoots the wildlife. Polly beats his sons. Bethany's father beat her.
They are all lashing out at the vulnerable because they cannot lash out at the institutions that broke them. That is a profound way to look at it. The society demands they act like nothing happened, so the violence just leaks out in these sanctioned domestic ways.
Exactly.
And it's within this deeply traumatized, highly tense environment that the text introduces its Gothic elements.
The supernatural lore.
Yes.
Yeah.
The supernatural lore of the estate acts as a dark mirror to the very real psychological horrors the characters are experiencing. The sources mention this massive black pond on the edge of the estate called Pole.
The death pond.
Right. And there's a really dark local legend attached to it dating back to the Tudor era. What exactly happened there?
The history of the pond is grotesque, and it establishes the site as a focal point of historical injustice and violence.
Okay.
In the wilder, unkempt part of the estate's garden, there's a massive, inky black pond overshadowed by a giant ancient oak tree. Back in the Tudor period, specifically 1524, the estate was called Champernoun Lodge.
Owned by a magistrate.
Edmund Champernoun. When his wife died of a sudden illness, Edmund wildly accused a local maid, Meliora Woon, of witchcraft.
And the villagers just went along with it.
Driven by fear and the magistrate's power, they executed Meliora without a trial. They hanged her from a massive branch of that very oak tree over the pond.
And left her there.
Her body was left hanging there as a warning until it decomposed and literally fell into the water below.
It's a horrific image, and it completely taints the landscape. But the lore doesn't stop with her execution.
No, it gets darker.
The sources say that in the centuries following Meliora's death, desperate local women would bring their unwanted, illegitimate babies to the pond.
They would weigh the infants down with stones and drown them.
Believing that the spirit of the innocent, wrongfully executed Meliora would act as a guardian and care for their souls in the afterlife.
It is an absolutely chilling piece of folklore, but it speaks volumes about the desperation of women in those eras who had no social support.
And because of this dark history, the locals believe the pond is fundamentally cursed.
They won't go near it. No animals will drink from it. Birds refuse to land on the branches near it.
And what about the fish?
There are fish in the water, but local legend insists that anyone who eats them gets violently ill and dies.
And adding fuel to the fire, there is the legend of the Champernoun treasure.
Right, the magistrate's wealth.
People believe his gold and silver were hidden somewhere on the estate, many believe at the bottom of that very pond, before his original manor house mysteriously burned to the ground years later.
So you have a site of execution, a mass grave for infants, and a rumored sunken treasure.
It is the ultimate Gothic cocktail.
It really is.
And tying this ancient history directly to the 1924 timeline is a character named Morwenna Woon.
The descendant.
She is a direct descendant of the executed maid living in Caradon Cottage. This cottage sits on a small, legally untouchable patch of land right on the edge of the Trengrouse estate.
Kenver has spent years, and likely a fortune in legal fees, trying to evict her, but the deed is ironclad.
So what is Morwenna actually like?
Morwenna is the quintessential local witch figure, and she's deliberately cultivated to be unsettling. She dresses in ragged clothes that seem hundreds of years out of date.
She carries a dagger in her belt.
She has long, wild gray hair, and her teeth are described in a very visceral way as looking like baked beans.
That paints quite a picture.
She survives on the margins of society by growing highly potent, mysterious herbs and selling them, alongside reading tarot cards for the tourists who come down to Penzance.
But what makes Morwenna and the Pawns so compelling isn't just the spooky stories, it's the physical reaction people have to them.
Yes, the physiological response.
When the tough, brawling Gardner twins, Menhennick and Hammett, get too close to the pond or the cottage, they don't just get spooked, they get violently physically ill.
The text says they suffer debilitating headaches and nausea, to the point where they literally pass out if they stay too long.
And when Bethany eventually ignores all the warnings and crosses onto Morwenna's land, her encounter is deeply visceral.
The atmosphere just shifts.
She describes the air suddenly feeling thick like glue. The temperature plummets. The sound of the birds in the crashing ocean completely vanishes, replaced by a suffocating silence.
And during this encounter, Morwenna looks at Bethany with these dull green eyes and claims the signs point to Bethany being the one chosen to dredge the pond and finally find the lost treasure.
And Bethany's reaction is extreme.
Bethany is so overwhelmed by the atmosphere, the physical sensations, and the intense, threatening presence Morwenna projects that she actually faints and has to be dragged away by the twins.
This raises a massive question for the listener, and it's one the author deliberately leaves ambiguous. Are we witnessing genuine supernatural activity?
Is it real magic?
Right. Is this a true haunting and a magical bloodline exerting power over the land?
That is the beauty of the text. You can read it as a straight ghost story if you want to. However, considering the heavy emphasis on science, psychology, and the physical reality of trauma elsewhere in the book, we have to consider a different angle.
A scientific explanation.
A severe environmental hazard combined with deep-seated psychological suggestion. Consider the physical reality of the pond.
It's a stagnant body of water.
Filled with centuries of decaying plant matter, and if the legends are even partially true, the decomposing remains of animals and perhaps humans.
So you're thinking toxic gases?
Precisely. It is entirely plausible that the pond is emitting high levels of methane or hydrogen sulfide.
Which smells terrible.
Yes, and that would perfectly explain why animals instinctively avoid it, why the fish are toxic to consume, and why the Gardner twins experience severe headaches and nausea. Those are textbook symptoms of hydrogen sulfide exposure when working too close to it.
That makes perfect sense. And Bethany's fainting spell could easily be the result of a sudden drop in oxygen near the water.
Or simply a massive panic attack.
Exactly. You have a girl with a severe traumatic brain injury, already prone to neurological episodes, stepping into an intensely stressful situation with a woman who is actively trying to terrify her.
It's the power of psychological suggestion meeting toxic topography.
It grounds the supernatural right back in the physical world. But what elevates this entire subplot is the absolute hypocrisy of the estate's residents regarding Morwenna.
Particularly Tegan Trengrouse.
Yes, because Kenver absolutely loathes Morwenna. He views her as a blight on his property, a reminder of a past he can't control, and strictly forbids anyone to interact with her.
But Tegan has a secret alliance with the witch.
This is where the class dynamics become incredibly layered. Tegan operates an entirely vegetarian kitchen, demanding the absolute highest culinary standards.
And the secret to her incredibly flavorful, highly praised food.
She secretly buys Morwenna's mysterious, potent herbs.
Even more bizarrely, Morwenna insists on only selling these herbs under the light of a full moon, believing it enhances their potency.
And Tegan complies. She actively defies her husband's strict orders, sneaking around in the dark to trade with a woman the rest of the community shuns.
All to maintain the perfection of her aristocratic dining table. Tegan's behavior is a fascinating study in aristocratic entitlement. She's perfectly willing to exploit the labor and the resources of the lower classes.
Even the ones she supposedly reviles.
As long as it serves her needs and she can keep it hidden. And this hypocrisy bleeds directly into how they manage the estate workers.
Right, like with the violence.
Tegan is perfectly willing to excuse the brutal, physical beatings that Tom Pauley inflicts on his sons. She writes it off to Bethany as the animal actions of the lower orders.
She essentially says, well, that's just how the working class behaves. We can't expect better from them.
Yet she relies entirely on those same lower orders, the witch, the servants, the gardeners, to maintain her elevated lifestyle.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Bethany, with her Hoxton grit and her neurologically compromised lack of a social filter, sees right through this entire charade.
She won't play the game.
She completely rejects the subservient, grateful orphan role they expect her to play. She is stepping into the 1920s, the era of flappers, jazz, and shifting women's rights in the city.
But Farthing Green is essentially stuck in the 1890s.
Exactly. They still expect women to be totally subservient, silent, and invisible.
Bethany becomes the disruptive modern force in this rigid Edwardian microcosm. She represents the changing world that Kenver is terrified of.
We see this vividly during a dinner party scene.
The graveyard confrontation.
Yes. Kenver tries to publicly chastise her and his children for exploring an off-limits graveyard on the estate. In a traditional Victorian setting, the child would bow their head, apologize, and accept the scolding.
But Bethany directly challenges the patriarch.
It's an incredible scene. She points out the absurdity of his rules, refuses to be spoken to like a child, and when Kenver furiously orders her to leave the table, she flat out refuses.
She stands her ground.
She forces him to be the one to retreat, and he actually storms out of his own dining room.
It is an unthinkable breach of etiquette for the era.
But the text gives us Bethany's internal monologue to explain her justification. She thinks, I'm no lady. I'm an orphan. Do you want me to lie my way through life?
She is weaponizing her lack of status. She realizes that since they already view her as damaged, lower-class trash, she has absolutely nothing to lose by speaking the truth.
And this defiance of class boundaries reaches a boiling point with the romantic tension between Bethany and Menhennick.
The gardener's son.
Let's talk about Menhennick. He is this rough, handsome, swaggering local boy who clearly fancies himself a bit of a lad.
He approaches Bethany with this incredibly arrogant assumption that London girls are easy.
He actually demands a kiss as payment for sharing local gossip about Morwenna and the hidden treasure.
But Bethany completely flips the power dynamic.
How does she react?
She doesn't cower, she doesn't play the blushing maiden, and she doesn't slap his face in a show of outraged modesty. She initiates the kiss.
She takes control.
She takes absolute control of the physical interaction, leaning in and kissing him first, which leaves Menhennick completely unnerved and out of his depth.
Because he expected to be the aggressor.
Yes, she is comfortable with her burgeoning sexuality in a way that utterly terrifies the rural, traditional mindset of the boys in Farthing Green.
And this tension culminates in a pivotal scene in the potting shed. Bethany and Menhennick seek out a quiet moment away from the main house.
The author sets the scene beautifully. The atmosphere is charged, dusty sunlight streaming through the small windows, the smell of damp earth.
But before anything truly scandalous can happen, the scene is violently interrupted.
By Tom Polly.
The bitter, abusive head gardener. He literally kicks the potting shed door open with his wooden leg. It's described almost like a jump scare, sending terracotta pots crashing to the floor.
The imagery of that interruption is so aggressive and invasive. Menhennick, who is terrified of his father's physical abuse, immediately runs away.
Leaving Bethany sitting there alone with her clothes slightly disheveled.
And Polly doesn't even yell at her. He just stares at her legs with this mask of absolute disgust and contempt.
Which the text implies is somehow worse than if he had screamed.
He immediately marches off to report her to Kenver.
The fallout from this incident is swift, severe, and deeply revealing about how the upper classes maintained control.
Kenver and Tegan don't even confront Bethany themselves.
Right. They send Mr. Luscombe, the butler, to deliver their ultimatum. It perfectly highlights their aristocratic detachment. They won't even dirty their hands by speaking to her about something so vulgar.
Mr. Luscombe informs Bethany that her behavior is repulsive to a Christian household, and the threat they lay out is explicitly designed to terrify her into submission.
What do they threaten her with?
They tell her that if she steps out of line again, she won't just be sent back to the slums of London. Kenver will use his wealth, his influence, and the signature of Dr. Cornisher to legally commit her to North Court.
The cousins, Lamorna and Simon, later explain to Bethany what North Court actually is, and it's horrifying.
It wasn't just a strict boarding school.
No, it was a notorious, prison-like local institution for unwed mothers, hysterical women, and troubled young girls.
This is a crucial historical context. In the 1920s, the medical and legal systems were frequently weaponized against rebellious women.
Because they had so much power.
If a woman of lower status exhibited sexual autonomy, anger, or simply refused to conform, wealthy families could easily have them declared morally insane or hysterical and locked away in these asylums, often for years, performing hard laundry labor.
They are threatening to literally erase her freedom and lock her in an asylum, essentially, for the crime of kissing a servant. It is a devastating threat, aimed entirely at controlling female sexuality and maintaining strict class boundaries. Kenver tells Tegan he wants to keep the servants in their place.
He's terrified of the social disorder, the strikes, and the changing morals he reads about in the newspapers.
He fought a brutal war for a very specific traditional version of England, and he is trying to violently enforce it on his estate, even as the world around him moves on.
But Bethany, being Bethany, refuses to break.
Which leads us to the final dramatic sequence of our deep dive.
The climax of nature.
The storm and the failed dredging.
This final sequence beautifully synthesizes all the thematic elements we've discussed. The trauma, the class division, the Gothic lore, and the rebellion.
Setting the stage, Tegan is away for the day on church business, leaving Bethany, Lamorna, Simon, and their local friend Hattie to spend the afternoon at Manigore Cove.
The family's private, pristine beach at the base of the cliffs.
At first, the text paints a scene of idyllic innocence. We see a rare moment of joy for Simon.
This traumatized, nightmare-plagued young boy completely transforms when he hits the water. He becomes wild and free, swimming joyfully.
And Bethany, who couldn't even fathom the ocean a few weeks prior, is tentatively exploring the tide pools. The sun is shining. Lamorna is sketching in her book. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated peace.
But nature in this story is as volatile as the character's suppressed emotions. Without any warning, the sky darkens. A massive, violent thunderstorm rolls in off the Atlantic.
And they are trapped.
The rain is so heavy and the lightning so fierce that the children are trapped on the beach. Rebecca's path, which is the steep, winding stone staircase carved into the cliff face that leads back up to the estate, instantly turns into a deadly, rushing waterfall.
It becomes far too slippery and dangerous to climb.
They are huddled under wet towels against the rock face, terrified as the tide continues to rise and churn, and the thunder shakes the ground.
The peril is genuine. Back at the estate, Menhennick and Hammett realize the children haven't returned before the storm hit and alert Kenver.
And Kenner's reaction is incredibly telling.
He doesn't just send his gardeners down to the cliff edge with some ropes. He mobilizes the entire Penzance lifeboat crew.
He coordinates a massive maritime rescue operation. It's an extreme overreaction that highlights his psychological state. He is frantic, driven by a desperate need for control.
Because of his trauma.
His war trauma has left him with a deep-seated neurological belief that the world is inherently unsafe, and any deviation from his strict rules, like not returning exactly on time before a storm, inevitably results in life-or-death scenarios.
He maps the trauma of the battlefield onto a civilian storm. The rescue itself reads like an action sequence. The lifeboat is crashing through the dark, heaving waves, the men hauling the freezing, vomiting children aboard in the pouring rain.
But there is a very eerie detail as they escape.
As they are rowing away from the deadly rocks of the beach, Simon looks back up at the top of the cliff. Through the teeming rain and the sudden flashes of lightning, he swears he sees a lone silhouette standing at the very edge, watching them struggle in the water.
The silhouette of Morwenna Woon. It adds an incredible layer of eerie dread to the rescue. Was she causing the storm with her magic? Was she simply watching the chaos unfold?
The author leaves it entirely up to the reader.
But it is that dread, that overarching mysterious influence of Morwenna that drives the final act of rebellion later that night.
Yes. Despite nearly dying in a storm, despite Kenver's absolute fury and his strict orders to stay in their rooms, Bethany, Simon, Lamorna, and Hattie decide they are going to fulfill the witch's prophecy right then and there.
They sneak out into the wet night, break into the potting shed, steal a heavy coil of rope and a metal grapnel hook.
And march to the death pond. They hurl the hook into the black, foul-smelling water over and over, hauling it back through the muck, desperately trying to dredge up the Champernowne treasure.
And what do they catch?
Absolutely nothing. Just clumps of dead, rotting weeds and foul-smelling mud. It's almost comical how anticlimactic the physical result is, right up until the moment Kenver and Tom Polly march across the wet lawn with lanterns and catch them red-handed.
Kenver's rage in this moment is monumental.
But as I was reading this, I kept thinking, why on earth did these children, especially Lamorna and Simon, who are terrified of their father's temper, risk his wrath to obey the bizarre demands of the local outcast witch?
This raises an important question, and I think it gets to the very heart of the novel. I believe they obey Morwenna because she offers something their parents simply cannot.
Which is?
A narrative of magic, consequence, and escape. Kenver's world is a traumatized, rigid reality governed by fear, strict rules, and the looming depressing shadow of the Great War.
And Tegan's world is one of forced cheerfulness, strict diets, and hypocritical social maintenance. Neither of those worlds has any room for wonder or hope.
Exactly. But Morwenna's world, the world of the curse, the hanging tree, and the hidden treasure, is thrilling. It offers the possibility that there is magic hidden in the dirt of their own backyard.
But there's more to life.
It suggests that history holds hidden riches, and most importantly, that their actions like dredging a pond in the middle of the night could actually change their fate.
The allure of the folklore provides a vital psychological escape from the suffocating, grief-stricken reality of Farthing Green.
Even if it means pulling up dead weeds, the act of searching for treasure is an act of hope.
That is such a powerful way to look at it. The treasure hunt is an act of hope in a hopeless place. And I think that brings us to the end of our journey today.
It does.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? The Children of Farthing Green uses the compelling, entertaining trappings of a ghost story and a childhood treasure hunt to explore something much heavier and more resonant.
It shows us a society desperately trying to rebuild itself on a foundation of mass grief.
Untreated trauma and a crumbling, hypocritical class system that punishes the vulnerable, it makes you wonder about the places around us.
How many of our own family histories, our own local legends, and spooky ghost stories are actually just masks for historical traumas?
What real human pain has been buried under a good ghost story?
It's a lens that changes how you view local history entirely. When you hear a story about a cursed piece of land, you start asking who lived there, who owned it, and who suffered on it.
And you have one final thought on that, right?
I do. I'd like to leave you with a final lingering thought, something the text hints at beautifully but never fully resolves. Consider the water of Farthing Green.
The underground spring.
Yes. The local lore tells us there is a pristine, ancient underground spring that feeds into this estate. But look at where that water ends up.
Okay.
On one hand, it flows into Pole, the death pond, a stagnant pool of decay, cursed by a violent history, physically toxic to the touch, and firmly located within the manicured, controlled grounds of the aristocratic Trengross family.
Right.
On the other hand, Tegan fundamentally believes that Morwenna's magical, life-giving herbs draw their incredible potency from this exact same water source. But on the outcast side of the wall,
Oh, wow. I hadn't connected those two things.
if the exact same water brings death, sickness, and stagnation to the grand estate, but brings life, flavor, and vitality to the impoverished outcast's garden, we have to ask a bigger question.
Is the land itself rejecting the aristocracy?
Is the soil inherently hostile to the legacy of the Champernowne and Trengross wealth?
That's fascinating.
Perhaps the true curse of Farthing Green isn't the ghost of an executed maid at all. Perhaps the curse is simply the inescapable, suffocating guilt of those who own the land and the trauma they continually inflict to keep it.
What an incredible thought to end on. The land itself rejecting the trauma of the people who claim to own it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources today. We hope this has inspired you to look a little closer at the stories, the silences, and the hidden depths in your own world. Keep asking questions, keep digging, and we will catch you next time.